You know, we had this little talk this morning about this stuff up here, and then I gave you an ATM lesson. How does this stuff up here, these categories of movement observation, relate to teaching ATM?
There are also ways of describing.
Also ways of describing what?
What? Movement.
Ways of describing, meaning, well, yeah, well, I mean, they're part of the instructions, is what you're saying. Ways of describing the movements that we're asking you to write. Okay, they're ways of describing. Did you hear that in the lesson? Yeah, so how, can you give me some examples of how they were ways of describing?
Path. You were getting very specific about, like, with distance, we should expect our hands to travel, or our shoulder to hand on the ensemble.
Okay, so like talking about how far the shoulder blade is sliding away from the spine and coming back, right? Okay. And what else along the lines of that?
Well, I was thinking, I mean, I was really having trouble, am I really going straight out, or am I going a little bit down or up, as well as straight to the side?
What some people were doing was this, rather than that.
Is that a difference in the path?
That's a difference in the path, yeah, because anytime you use the direction words, you're talking about space, and anytime you're talking about movement in space, you're talking about a path. Yes?
And also in, I think it was the Sphinx position, you ask us to try to keep our heads closer to like a comfortable horizon rather than looking down, because a lot of us are looking down.
Right. Okay, good. You know, so they're like you know, there's all these instructions that are really specific about which way you're heading. Not where you're starting, but where you're going to. So like, you know, tilting your head forward and back, or to the right and to the left, right? Those are all descriptions of path, of your trajectory, right? They are also what? What else are they besides descriptions of path? The answer's not on that board. It's on what you already know. What kind of instructions are? Well, let's see. They are not positional constraints. And they are not configurational constraints. They are, speak up? Destructional. No. Who said it? Instructional constraints. Right? So if I say, you know, move your arms to the side and not up, that's a constraint. And every time you tell somebody to move in a specific direction, you're saying, don't move any other way but this way. So that is a constraint. Does that make sense? That's a kind of instructional constraint. I think there are other ways, or there are other things to do about this. So what other things have people done with you when you've done it?
Well, I don't know if this is a good idea or not. Might not be. But one thing, some people don't know the difference between helping and not helping. And if they're helping, raise their head and say, okay, let's see if we can establish a vocabulary here. Why don't you do it completely by yourself, okay? You're doing it now, and you're helping. Now, try to let me do it completely on my own. Maybe we'll do it different. Okay, that's you not helping. So now we know what the difference is. Try to let me do it.
Right? So, I mean, that's called calibration. You have some idea of what you're aiming for, and you're establishing a range, rather than trying to just pick one mark.
Right.
You're finding the whole range. And so I think that, generally speaking, is really good. Right? And it's much better than saying to the person, let go, or do less. Because compared to what? You've got to give them the measuring stick and go along, you know, one end, and it's called arguing the extremes. And then they can begin to have a range. So I think that's really good. I think it's a really important thing to remember when you're teaching ATM as well. Because I'll tell you what doesn't work in teaching ATM. And you've had this experience here as well as other places. Just go, somebody says to you, go slower. You're like, slower than what? You know, you need the range to know where you are. And you can't assume the person knows what you're talking about. So I also think it's a really bad idea to say to somebody, it's a really bad idea to say to somebody, stop helping.
Yeah,
Because that presupposes that they know they're helping. It's much more useful to say, do you know you're helping? So that does two things. It presupposes that they're helping. And it asks them if they notice it or not. Rather than having a discussion with them about whether you're helping or not, you're asking them whether they're noticing it or not. So I also think it's much more polite, because people could go, no, I don't notice it. Or yeah, I do, but I don't know what to do about it. Then you have a choice of how you're going to respond. Yes, Michelle?
Yeah, I like Mary's idea. When someone is resisting the movement, I'll sometimes ask them to resist harder, to start establishing that
Right.
range. But I still don't quite get when someone is taking over and going faster, like how do you start establishing that range where they can feel? Do you ask them to, barely let you touch them, as you're going in that direction?
So you might ask them if they notice it. You might, when in doubt, this is the Ericksonian thing, when in doubt, prescribe the symptom. So ask them to do it. Say, I'm going to start the movement, and once you get, which way I'm going, I'd like you to, you take over.
Okay.
So just have them do it. And then say, okay, now, can you let me be the guide the whole time? And so then, they're not doing it, all of a sudden shows up in the context of that request as a problem, rather than you going, you're taking over.
Would it be helpful?
Which I've actually had people say to me, which I never really.
Would it be helpful to also have someone go in the other direction, go all the way from leading you to resisting so they can find what's in between? Or is that pointless if someone only has a problem with this movement?
Well, let's think about that. So if someone, like you said, if someone's resisting you, you have them push against you, actively resist.
That's where I start.
Right? Yeah, that's where you start. So if you think about, let's say we were talking about lifting the shoulder, right? So on lifting the shoulder, resisting would mean pulling the shoulder back. And actually it's not back, but it's back and in. Right? And the muscles that are doing that, well, what are you doing? Well, the muscles that would interfere with the shoulder. So when this, actually, let's do it rather than me. Use our thumb here. So when the muscles are, when the shoulder's moving away, or it's coming forward, it's making this kind of movement, right? Can you see that? So the muscles that would resist would be these muscles here. These muscles not getting long would interfere with that, right? So what you're doing when you ask these muscles, when you're saying resist, is you're asking the muscles that aren't letting go to actively contract. Because the idea is that when they stop, the person can let them go more, right? So the thing is about resisting, well, when the person takes over, it's not these muscles doing it, it's the muscles on the other side. So if you ask them to resist, it'd be these muscles doing it rather than these. So what you would have to do is put your hand here and say, push against my shoulder, by my hand. And then you'd be activating the same muscles that they're activating. Does that make sense?
Yeah.